We launched native USDC in September, and since then we have almost 100 million of USDC issued. So there's two sort of buckets or categories of kind of assets we're interested in. One is stablecoins, and others are real world assets. 2023 was all about getting our infrastructure kind of stable, obviously going live with native USDC itself. 2024 is continuing to build on that success, but also looking at...
Welcome to the Bare Metal Podcast.
Hi, listeners of the Bare Metal Podcast. This is Ship the Code from Rocco X, back here again today with Jelena Djuric of the Noble Chain. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, and thanks for pronouncing my name perfectly.
Yeah. So, give us an intro. How did you get into crypto?
Yeah. So I've been working within the Cosmos ecosystem for the past 4 years in a variety of capacities. So before starting kind of Noble and working on that full time, I was working at Informal Systems with the team there. For those that don't know, Informal is one of the leading contributors of the Cosmos stack. They work on a lot of things, but a lot of core development around things like Tendermint and IBC and other facets. And so within that capacity, got to work on things like shared security, the go-to-market side of that, worked in a marketing capacity, product development capacity, BD, and the like, and also got to be very kind of deep in the ecosystem for a number of years. Before that, I was at Cello for just a brief 6-month period, and then before that, for a much longer period of time, I was at Definity, which is one of the early kind of projects that came out of the ICO boom back in 2017 that was looking to compete and kind of innovate on against sort of Ethereum and this kind of monolithic kind of blockchain kind of idea, make a computing environment that was a lot more scalable for application developers and things like this. Anyways, so got to see a lot of kind of the early kind of developments around crypto and blockchains back from that 2017 period. And so, yeah, we've come a long way. Obviously, now it's 2024 and things are very, very different. But it's been really exciting to see those developments over the years.
So how did you get to Noble, actually? So Noble it's an interesting blockchain. It has a partnership with Circle, right? Meaning like getting this on the road might be harder than, just running the Ignite command line and, spinning up a new chain. So how did you guys strategize around this and take the project from the ground?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Noble really is a story that actually goes back to 2022. So I'm sure you remember, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do, we had Terra that was a very large sort of part of the Cosmos ecosystem, and specifically the UST stablecoin. And so at that time, while I was in Informal Systems, we were actually working on shared security, the early kind of versions of what would become interchain security. And as we were thinking about what is the killer sort of application for this new shared security model, you had the UST DPEG. And so I don't know how much kind of you recall like those days, but for a lot of
very
much so, yeah. Well, I'd like to hear a little bit about that. But for a lot of projects in the space, it was a obviously a critical situation. DEXs like Osmosis had UST as a key part of their DEX, as in many different pools, the liquidity. I wonder actually what the all-time high kind of liquidity of UST was. I think, probably north of $500 million. So when that went to zero, that kind of that value, it was obviously a shock to everyone. And so myself and a couple of other people thought to our, we kind of looked at the situation. We were thinking, I was thinking a lot about interchain security. And then at the same time, you actually had DYDX that was signaling their intentions to migrate their V3 to build V4 in as a Cosmos app chain. And so they would also need USDC as native collateral on their chain. And so you had all of these different factors like playing a role at the same time. You had Terra, you had DYDX, you had our work on interchain security. And we had a very simple kind of question that we asked ourselves, which is how do we bring native USDC to Cosmos? How do we come up with a design that would satisfy Circle's requirements and would work for the ecosystem as a whole? And that's really how Noble was kind of born in the very early days. So, we have kind of key principles that we think about when we think about kind of Noble, and those actually originate from the very early days. One is neutrality. So we don't look at ourselves as another DEX or another DeFi protocol. We're very neutral in that sense. Our one application that we optimize for is native asset issuance, which is very contrary to other chains that also bring in like other native assets, whether that's Wrap Bitcoin or even Tether. Another key principle is flexibility. So we want to make sure that as we're satisfying kind of the needs of the issuer, we're also thinking about the different kind of stakeholders or kind of integrator partners for this asset. And so that's everything from kind of wallets to centralized exchanges to other stakeholders that we can actually talk about in a bit on the partnership side. And then another is security, right? So we launched with a proof of authority validator set, and we could talk a little bit about why we did that in a moment. But another key consideration that we're thinking about is how do we obviously build upon that and leverage something like replicated security. And then another principle is interoperability. So how do we have that sort of, kind of total kind of permissionless interoperability with the rest of the ecosystem, create a user experience that's, delightful and that doesn't make your head hurt around things like bridging and wrapped assets and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's really the story from the early days. We've come a long way since then, but the way I like to kind of summarize Noble is it was a specific use case that filled a specific need that, that I think a lot of people value as a result of that kind of application.
Well, I definitely know Cosmos loves a stable coin, so having USDC natively is really good, really, really cool. I'm interested in definitely digging into the security and the construction of the chain. But before that, how are you guys? What about the traction? How much? What's the issuance? What sort of volumes are you guys looking at? Can you talk about where Noble is today?
Definitely. So we launched native USDC in September of 2023. So it did take actually quite a while to kind of go live, and there was again a variety of factors we had to consider, and I'm actually very proud of that. We didn't kind of rush to market just to kind of be first. We made sure that we were kind of very thoughtful about each piece, but we went live September 2023, and since then we have almost 100 million of USDC issued. I believe the last number I saw this morning is around 97 million. So that's pretty incredible. That in such a short period of time we've seen that adoption. And then in terms of total kind of volume and activity in the Cosmos ecosystem, we've done about 350 million. Dollars worth of IBC token transfers. So that is essentially when I send USDC between any Cosmos app chain, whether that's from Noble or from a DEX like Osmosis, that total value is about $350 million in the last 30 days. So it's exciting to see those numbers, especially kind of in a situation where it is kind of relatively slower than how it's been in kind of preceding years from like a demand perspective. But it is definitely kind of on the up and up.
But it's clear that USDC isn't sitting on accounts, right? The movement volume is higher than the issuance. So this is USDC sort of moving around the system and being active.
Yeah, that's a great point. So one of our key sort of success metrics is IBC out. So we look at kind of how much USDC flows from Noble to other Cosmos chains. So we have zero incentive, zero desire to see that USDC stay on Noble. As you mentioned, like kind of sitting idle in accounts. With the like Noble accounts. So we want to see USDC kind of being minted on Noble. And then immediately kind of taken to other Cosmos chains where there is like a marketplace and sort of a use case for that asset. This is very different than other kind of chains that do native asset issuance. So the most obvious example is Kava. So Kava worked with Tether to actually bring native USDC to Cosmos. And actually, if you look at the total kind of mints, I think they're about, I want to say between 30 and $50 million. But when you actually look at what's been IBC'd out and used within the ecosystem, it's less than 10 million. And so, for us, that propagation, to your point, kind of sending USDC to and from Cosmos chains is really important. And that's exactly what we try to kind of facilitate. I should mention the kind of ways you can mint USDC right now on Noble. There are a few ways, and those will kind of increase as we work with more and more stakeholders, like exchanges, for example, or on and off ramps, fiat on and off ramps. For now, there's a couple ways. So one is directly with Circle. So if you're a business, so this is mostly for businesses and institutions, you can have something called a Circle account, and then you can mint directly by depositing a bunch of US dollars, and then you can mint that on Noble as a destination chain. That's like one obvious way. Another way is through Coinbase. So we have a integration with Coinbase, so you can deposit USDC into a Noble account. And then another one, which I'm kind of more excited about, you could say, is actually CCTP. So Circle's cross-chain transfer protocol, and we can kind of get into more details on that. But that's a very natively on-chain way to mint, burn USDC kind of across not just Cosmos, but across all of the entire kind of blockchain ecosystem that supports this particular protocol. So there will be more and more ways to kind of use USDC and Cosmos, and of course do things like minting.
And get it. USDC obviously a key part of the Noblation strategy, but you keep saying this asset issuance chain, and asset obviously lending itself to a more general interpretation. You guys are already working with more than USDC, right? You already have some partners. I read online USYC. Interested to dig into what that is, and what's your strategy around like expanding sort of the assets that you issue? What are the focus areas where you're interested in getting Noble?
Yeah, so we're really, first of all, we want to prove the model of Noble first, and which I maybe it's a little bit too early to say, but I think we're kind of getting to that point where specifically in the app chain context, you need a chain that is purpose built and dedicated to this one use case, which is how do we bring native assets, proliferate them throughout the ecosystem, and have that be a delightful user experience, and have that be kind of properly kind of managed. And so we've been working very, very hard to do that with USDC. And really, as a result of our current successes, we were able to work with, for example, Hashnote to onboard them into the ecosystem. So there's two sort of buckets or categories of kind of assets we're interested in. One is stable coins, and others are real world assets. So of course, USDC is a stable coin, and the second category for RWAs would be USYC. So Hashnote is the entity, so the analog to Circle in this case, that issues USYC. They are also US based, and their RWA is actually a tokenized a tokenized security, which gets you exposure to US short-term treasury bills, and those yield, of course, interest on chain. I think right now it's about 5.2% or so, and they're already live on Ethereum. And I think the TVL is currently around 50 million or so. So this is a very new category of let's say RWAs as kind of the highest level category. And in terms of this idea of like treasury bills on chain. And so we still, I think, have a lot to sort of anticipate around how these assets will move kind of natively on chain. What Circle has done with USDC is extremely sort of innovative. Like if you think about it, how you can do this like natively on chain and have something like USDC kind of interoperable with things like Ethereum and Noble and Polygon and in the future Solana and so forth. And so with USYC, there are different considerations just around like, from a regulatory and legal perspective. This isn't just digital cash, so to speak. It's a little bit more complicated because these are classified as securities. And so we're working super hard to figure that out. And then again, hopefully prove the model that Noble can also play within this RWA space as we have with the stable coins with USDC.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting endeavor, and I think a lot of people are going to be happy about the chance of being able to get exposure to U.S. Treasuries, because it's surprisingly hard to get for people outside of the U.S.
Yeah, I'm curious actually from your perspective, because you're based in Prague, what that looks like, or
So,
other.
so you'd have to go through a bank, right? It's a
Yeah,
product that's not really liquid. You have to. It takes a long time to acquire access. So I think being able to just sort of have a tokenized version of this and just being able to permissionlessly buy and sell this, like, reduces the friction miles, right? I think it's a very interesting thing. I also read that USYC represents the yield from the repo and reverse repo markets, which like an expert like Hashnode Labs doing on behalf of somebody like me who can then participate in the yield. That's really cool. That's a service that I'd like to use.
Yeah.
So RWAs, obviously super interesting. You say stable coins and RWAs. Any other partnerships you have in this respect that you want to talk about, either on the stablecoin side or on the RWA side?
Yeah, for sure. So another partnership I'm super excited about. This isn't yet live, just like USYC is not yet live, but we are in the process of building out, is actually with a project out of Japan called Toki Finance. So they are really interesting group of folks. They themselves have a partnership with MUFG, which is the Mitsubishi Financial Group. It's one of, if not the largest financial conglomerate in Japan. And they have a partnership with them to build out a kind of Japanese stablecoin that would, in a certain case, track the value of the yen. So Japan is a really interesting kind of jurisdiction for stablecoins and just generally these types of products. It's actually the second world's largest economy. They have a lot of kind of more permissive and kind of clear guidelines for stablecoin issuance. So in Japan, we'll see a lot more kind of developments on this front in terms of bringing these kind of Japanese stablecoins to market. And so Toki Finance is one of those teams doing that. And so they, just like other stablecoin issuers, have a multi-chain strategy. One of those, of course, being the IBC ecosystem. And so we are their partner for that within the ecosystem. So really excited to see the use case that'll come out of that. And it'll be, I think, very different than I think what we see with USDC.
Yeah, interesting. So this would be like a yen stablecoin.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're looking at the Japanese market. So they'd be issuing the yen. Do you have any timeline of when that could go online? Is this a month's thing or a year's thing?
Yeah, definitely a month's thing. Definitely this year. Actually, we announced this partnership last year, halfway through or so, and it's taken a long time. Not because the technical lift is necessarily the most complicated thing in the world, but actually more from like a kind of legal, compliant, kind of organizational perspective.
Yeah.
It's taken some time. So, it's funny. I think for a lot of us in the crypto space, we see so much movement every day, but we actually forget how early we are to a lot of these initiatives and kind of trends. And so even something like Japanese stablecoins and kind of that whole market, like their guidelines and their regulatory framework, I think only came into effect later last year. They have something very similar to MiCA, if you're familiar, in the EU, that allows sort of private entities, kind of private companies, kind of develop these stable coins in a way that's legal and compliant. You have to report on your you have to report on your treasury and things like this, which I think is a big step forward especially for those of us that have been kind of burned in the past with.
Yeah, I mean that's why Noble seems to me like a really interesting project, because you guys I feel like you guys are in the middle between two slipstreams. Like one is the crypto direction, which is like moving head over heels fast, just tumbling forward, and then your other hand is stretched inside this institutional space where things take months. Then you have a reorg in the company. I used to work in AML actually for Swiss banks, so it's I sort of understand the other side of the space. And kudos for, it requires commitment and diligence and just like being there every day, pushing things forward. So it's really impressive that you're able to capture like two, big stablecoin markets and bring them to Cosmos.
That's exactly it. And another way to kind of think about Noble's role, you summarized it perfectly, but Another way is we see ourselves as sort of like an ambassador for the issuer in this app chain ecosystem. So if you think about it from the perspective of an issuer, daily, their kind of job isn't necessarily to understand the ins and outs of Cosmos and things like applications in the Cosmos ecosystem that are kind of taking off. Things like buying bad kids with USDC. Like that's not necessarily on the top of their kind of priority list. But for us, it is. It's thinking about what are the integration points, what are the use cases, in this particular ecosystem, and then how do we kind of drive that, kind of that adoption. So we sit, as you said, we sit in between kind of this issuer that like lives kind of off chain and has all of these considerations. And then the other side of that is obviously kind of the app chain ecosystem itself. So yeah, it's an interesting position to take. Definitely different than I think what everyone else is doing, including those like Kava who are bringing even Tether to the space. So we take a very different approach.
I think you touched a really interesting point, which is integrations. Like, do you guys have a grants program or a developer program? Do you organize hackathons? Do you somehow support sort of work with USDC, build on top of Noble and IBC?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are extremely kind of collaborative in how we kind of build out like both our infrastructure and in the future, things like a front end, like where you can interact with kind of the Noble chain. So a couple of those key partners, one is Strangelove Labs. So they are a core development team in the Cosmos ecosystem. They do work with, a lot of different projects, Celestia, Penumbra. They work on the Cosmos Hub itself, et cetera. And so we've been fortunate to work with their development team on things like packet forward middleware. So for those kind of more technical folks listening in, this kind of middleware is actually a way for assets to be routed on chain. So if I have USDC sort of on Osmosis and I want to send that to DYDX, technically, if I send that directly from my Osmo address to a DYDX address, that USDC is not fungible with the original native USDC that came from Noble. And so we have packet forward middleware where you actually route that asset kind of on the back end. And so I, as a user, don't have to do these 2 clicks to go from Osmosis to Noble to DYDX to do that path unwinding. I can do that kind of directly. And so this is one example of where we worked with a team like Strangelove to kind of build out that middleware
to solve the problem.
Exactly.
To wrap it for users that maybe don't know what the problem is, I mean, tokens do sort of remember, if I wave my hands around, they remember the IBC path they took, and that actually the name or might not match with the same token that's moved through in a different IBC path. So as you said, they would be fungible. So the construction, the solution to that would be to sort of return the USDC back to Noble and then move it from Noble to the target chain, which would then again cause the name to be simply from Noble to target chain and fungible with all the other tokens that came from Noble over there, right? And thus introducing or removing this problem.
Exactly. I mean,
is that a fair summary?
It is a fair summary, and like one kind of relatable kind of experience for like this path component is like a URL in my browser. There is actually a path that I took when I kind of land on a homepage, and then I kind of go to subpages, and there is actually an address that kind of tells my browser like where I am in that flow. Same thing with IBC tokens, although if you think about it, people for that use case shouldn't know the path and don't really need to know the path. I mean, there is a security component, obviously, to IBC, and that is part of this like kind of path idea. But for us, we do want to kind of eliminate some of those user experience kind of challenges, and packet forward middleware is one way to do that. But another team that we work very closely with is actually Skip. So we'll have more to share on this in the next couple of weeks. But Skip is a really interesting project. So they are very similar to Noble, I think, in their kind of MO, their modus operandi, like how they work, which is they're highly collaborative, work with a number of different teams. And their product is kind of an API. It's fundamentally an API, but what that API does is it's a router. So it helps, similar to packet forward middleware, the concept, it helps sort of find the most efficient route for a particular kind of token. And so they have a front end right now called ibc.fun. And so if I want to, again, send my USDC on osmosis to Stargaze, for example, to buy an NFT, like a bad kid, I can do that through IBC Fund. So I don't have to go from, osmosis to Noble to Stargaze to kind of, have that canonical fungible asset kind of in my wallet to buy that bad kid. I can just use something like ibc.fun. So we'll be working with them. We already work with them like through this kind of router for the Cosmos ecosystem itself, like a use case I just described. But another thing they'll be integrating is Circle's cross-chain transfer protocol, which we've implemented on Noble kind of natively. So this was actually the first non-EVM implementation of CCTP to go live. And so there'll be an.
Can you explain what that does? I'm not myself familiar with CCTP. I don't know if the listeners will be. So that's a circular level protocol that allows coins to move between different ecosystems. Is that something that works outside the IBC world?
Absolutely. So this is very much outside of the IBC world. So this CCTP is the cross-chain transfer protocol. And what it is it's effectively Circle's bridge. So Circle kind of acts as the bridge when I, for example, want to send my USDC from my Ethereum wallet to, let's say, Noble or Polygon or Arbitrum or any of the other chains that they support. So what happens sort of on the back end is I, as a user, I burn my USDC, let's say on Ethereum. That calls into an attestation request from Circle to sign to say this USDC that is being burned, passed all the KYC kind of AML checks that were done at a certain point in time. And once that attestation has been sort of approved, it sends a function on, let's say, Noble as a destination chain to mint that USDC. So I don't have to, let's say, use a bridge to do that, which is typically how that would work. I can simply use CCTP. So if you think about it, it's a much more capital efficient kind of experience than your typical kind of cross-chain transfer that would require something like a bridge in the middle. And it's really nice. Again, it is this kind of, it's very fast. There's a block explorer, in fact, another team that we've actually, that we're working with from a development perspective is Range. And so Range actually built out a block explorer that shows this activity. So, going from Ethereum to Noble or Noble to Polygon or, whatever chain is supported. And so, yeah, that entire list comprises Ethereum, Arbitrum, Avalanche, Optimism, Polygon, and Base right now. And they'll support Solana as well soon. So again, it's a very interesting kind of development, I think, from a bridging perspective to kind of consider the issuer in this case effectively becomes the bridge and that trust layer as they are with, from a stablecoin perspective anyways. And so we're very proud that we were able to be the first sort of non-EVM implementation of this protocol and kind of first to market there.
Interesting. Yeah, there don't seem to be any additional trust assumptions beyond the ones that exist for regular holders of USDC, right? Because it's still the Circle, looking at the burn on one side and then issuing the funds on another chain.
Exactly. And I mean, we can actually talk about, and we can talk about what that flow would look like if you don't have CCTP. So what would happen is I would, burn the USDC, the USDC would get burned on Ethereum. A bridge would pick it up. They would wrap that as a kind of wrapped bridged asset. They would route that to kind of a destination chain like Noble. They would unwrap it and then kind of mint it. And the way that the unwrapping would work is they'd have to probably swap it kind of in an AMM of sorts to kind of mint that kind of native asset on the back end.
Where someone has to provide the liquidity that has to be paid for. So that's an expensive.
Exactly. So we actually had a recent example of someone kind of using a front end that they didn't realize kind of used this bridging kind of unwrapping process and actually losing kind of a bunch of money due to slippage because there wasn't enough liquidity for the native USDC in that pool. And that's obviously not a nice experience. So again, CCTP is very capital efficient from that perspective, and you're not exposed to those kind of risks as you would normally.
Let's look into the future for a bit. What kind of, what are the priorities for 2024 for Noble? What is it you'd like to focus on?
Yeah, I'm definitely, I alluded to this earlier, but we really do want to prove the model with RWAs as well, right? So 2023 was all about getting our infrastructure kind of stable, reliable, putting together the proof of authority validator set, obviously going live with native USDC itself, which we did in late September, and having all the integrated partners for native USDC, like exchanges, like on and off ramps, like wallets, like infrastructure partners, like Skip, and so on and so forth. And so 2024 is continuing to build on that success, but also looking at how do we prove that model with RWAs. Again, you have very different considerations, in fact, for an RWA. Like the kind of idea of minting, burning, kind of whitelisting kind of exists, but from a kind of technical infrastructure perspective, it's a bit different. It's not as permissionless. It's not call it as like let's say liquid, just because of the kind of legal considerations that you have compared to stablecoins. And so, proving that model out is something that we're very keen on. We'll have more to share around kind of the architecture for that we're considering or building for USYC specifically. But that is definitely our big focus. And then really beyond that, just increasing TVL, increasing activity. We're working with kind of more and more, kind of call them like off-chain kind of partners, like new partners coming to the space that are looking at things like kind of, native USDC and Cosmos. So one of those partners is Krafton. So they're a South Korean gaming development company. They're the makers of PUBG, and they are actually building a Cosmos chain called Settleless. And Settleless is a chain that will be able to do creator payouts in stablecoins. And one of those coins is USDC. And so we're working with them to kind of to create this IBC workflow on the back end where I, as a creator that's building some game, can be compensated with native USDC. And so that entails kind of partners like, of course, like Krafton, like the Settleless chain, and then entities like Stripe, right? Because you want to make it like as seamless of an environment as possible. And so all of a sudden, these kind of workflows get more and more complicated the more stakeholders are involved. Kind of there's a mushroom effect. And so we are working on making sure that can be kind of managed. So these very specific use cases, again, very real world in nature, very real world concerns, making sure we can, satisfy them, both for kind of our existing work, which is around USDC, and then in the future, again, other assets like USYC and like Japanese stablecoins and so on and so forth. So
it sounds like apart from all the issuance, like you guys are becoming sort of the hub for routing this and making sure things don't get complicated along the way, making sure all these integrations work. So that's you've got your work cut out for you.
Well, it's funny when I interact with my browser, there are how many kind of workflows on the back end, for me to do something as simple as, visit a homepage like, I don't know, twitter.com or x.com. There's APIs and cloud services and microservices and security providers, and we don't really think about that, and nor should we. So that's exactly how we look at our job. But for a use case like stable coins and kind of digital assets kind of living on chain. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and that's makes our job both kind of fun and kind of simplified. So
love the philosophy. It reminds me of Unix. Do one thing, do it really well, integrate and connect with as many parties as you can to just increase the usefulness of the whole product. So best of luck with that. Hoping you guys will have lots more fun things to release in 2024 and beyond.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much for chatting today, Jelena. It was a fun podcast.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, and hope to be back soon.
Absolutely.